We are now on Bill 309-36LS, and I will acknowledge the speaker right now. Speaker Therese Chalahi, you're acknowledged on the main motion of the bill.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the physicians, I would make a motion to place Bill number 309-36LS as amended by the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture onto the third reading file. I'd like to speak on that motion.
Thank you very much, Speaker Chalahi. You may proceed.
Thank you. The Physicians Practice Act Statement of Policy, codified in Section 12202 of Chapter 12, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, the obligation of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners to the people of Guam. It states, quote, "The practice of medicine is a privilege granted by the people acting through their elected representatives. It is not a natural right of individuals. In the interests of public health, safety, and welfare, and to protect the public from the unprofessional, improper, incompetent, unlawful, fraudulent, and/or deceptive practice of medicine, it is necessary to provide laws and regulations to govern the granting and subsequent use of the privilege to practice medicine. The primary responsibility and obligation of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners is to protect the people of Guam." Again, the primary responsibility and obligation of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners is to protect the people of Guam, unquote. However, for numerous patients and their families who have gone to the board to seek accountability and justice for alleged medical negligence or improper conduct, this has not been the case. When Bill 309 was written, there was complaints made by people of Guam to the board that some of them had been sitting for years and they had not been notified. There was no follow-up on their cases to the complainants themselves. And even after requests by those complainants for updates. As one example was Mr. David Lebowski and his family, who had to read about the status of the board investigation into the death of his 5-year-old son Asher through the media. Mr. Lebowski stated that this was heartbreaking and a stab to their hearts. "I cannot imagine how I would feel if that was my family in their place. I don't believe that is acceptable, and it should never have happened, and we must prevent it from happening again to anyone else." He was not the only one who complained of similar circumstances. We had an oversight hearing prior to introduction of this bill, and during that oversight, it was reported that of all the complaints filed from 2018 to 2020, none had an adjudication hearing. And as of, I think it was June 2020, eight complaints were made in they reported on I think as of October 2021, I think there were 27 complaints without adjudication. There were 8 complaints in 2018, which resulted in no violations. All 8 resulted in no violations. Out of 16 complaints in 2019, 14 resulted in no violations. There was 1 pending and 1 under investigation, but withdrew their application for a license prior to completion of the investigation. Withdrawal of an application while under investigation is automatically reported to the National Practitioners Data Bank. After the public hearing, and at that public hearing, the Health Professional Licensing Office staff that was present promised that they would notify the complainants and that they were going to implement a process to do that. And I want to report that they have done that. And for the most part, I think that they report at every meeting now, whether they are doing this or not. But this bill would make it a requirement of the board as part of its regular procedures. It is the board that is responsible for the complaints and the adjudication of the complaints or the dismissal of the complaints. So what we're adding to the existing language and statute is that the board, they shall be acknowledge reports received through phone call and email within 72 hours or through certified mail within 7 working days. They shall be promptly informed through phone call and email within 72 hours or through certified email within 7 working days of the board's actions, decisions, and final disposition. And the prior law, or the current law, only requires notification after final disposition, which wasn't occurring either. But this would add a little bit more, and that is like any action that the board takes during any of its meetings, that they should notify those complainants. And it's really just to keep them updated on what has happened in their case. According to a recent report that we received from the Board of Medical Examiners, they are now down, or if you look at their agenda, they're now down to a single digit of complaints that are still pending, as opposed to the numbers that we were seeing back in our oversight hearing. And I'm very glad for this. I want to thank the HPLO staff that has contributed to that. I think there are some new board members on the GBME that have absolutely contributed to that and taken up a lot of the investigations that were pending. And, you know, of course, they finally got through their procurement for attorneys. So I'm looking forward to seeing the actual adjudication hearings where those are necessary. So some of the amendments that were made by the committee include, just to be more precise about what prompt means, because we had said they would be promptly notified, and this more particularly describes what would be defined as prompt. And so those were suggestions made by public who were also complainants to the board. And they were also based on some other practices around the island, including GMH and other areas. So again, this is just one of the bills that were introduced at around the same time after that public hearing. And this one is simply that to put into statute that the board shall promptly acknowledge reports received and that they shall report on the actions, decisions, and final disposition in the matters. So I ask my colleagues' support, and I want to thank the community who came out, you know, to our oversight hearings, who sent messages to my office or called my office, because I really do believe these are very brave people, that it is not easy to make a complaint against any professional licensing board or any licensed professional member of any board. And so to do that, you know, it takes a lot. But to be completely ignored after that, I think has really caused some effects on these people. And so I just think this would just be a small part, and that is just, you're mandated to give them feedback. They have to know you've received their report, their complaint, and they have to know if the board made any action such as dismissal of the complaint. I think that's what Mr. Lebowski found out in the newspaper, that they dismissed his complaint, or they found no violation. And especially that type of a finding is, I think it's something that you should hear directly from the board when that decision is made. I want to thank the board and the HPLO because they've implemented a process right now where they list the complaint numbers on their agenda so those complainants can follow along. And I want to encourage them to continue that practice. I think there was some discussion in their board meeting at one time to remove that. But I think that is a transparent process, and that's like they're numbers, so nobody knows whose case or who was complained about. But that would allow the complainants, those potential victims, to follow along with their own cases. And so I just think these are all measures, and they add to the same transparency of the board's actions, especially in regards to these very serious matters. And I hope I don't have to remind any of you that not all of these complaints are regarding, medical negligence. Recently, several of the complaints have been in regards to sexual misconduct. And I think that's alarming that these complainants are not going to be told what the status of their cases are. And I've talked to some of these. They've testified at our hearings, and you can see that this has really had a significant emotional impact on them. This is part of several bills that I've introduced to address the range of challenges that have impeded the Guam Board of Medical Examiners from adjudicating cases and informing complainants and fulfilling their mandates to the people of Guam. And I want to thank my colleagues because in the budget bill, we were able to give the board, the HPLO office, a little bit more money. We have worked with these boards to ensure that they are able to procure lawyers to prosecute, hearings officers, investigators, and it's really a matter of them keeping track of the fees that they are generating and using those fees to fulfill their mandates. And most especially, I want to thank those brave people who came out to testify on this bill and on the oversight hearings that preceded introduction of this bill. So I would ask my colleagues for their support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. Are there anyone wishing to speak on the main motion? Anyone wishing to speak in the main motion? Senator Joe San Agustin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. The only thing that really bothers me in the medical profession is how we allow some of our constituents to be victims of folks that have issues where they came from. That's really what is more alarming to me, because we find out that some of them that got complaints on Guam, sure, 72 hours, that's great. Even sooner would be better. But it's just to find out that they have the same issue in the jurisdiction they came from. And that's where maybe we need to figure out a way, and with the oversight, Madam Speaker, the author of this bill, we would hope we can close that door that you can't get employed on Guam until you're cleared. That's one of the things most of our constituents are concerned about. And for the folks that are already on Guam, well, if there's a report, you made your bed, sleep on it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. Anyone else? Senator Tello, you are recognized on the main motion.
Sujus Masi, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in favor of Bill 309-36. And I'd like to thank Madam Chair for the chairperson overseeing health for all the good work she has done, because this bill is the beginning of several other bills that we hear that are coming down the pipeline to address some of the concerns for our public, to ensure that transparency and accountability is set at the front line of anything having to do with healthcare, but of course the safety of our community as well. I had the opportunity to view the public hearing and read the testimonies from Bill 309-36. It's very concerning when the board has a responsibility, as stipulated in Title 12, Section 12203, letter B, number 7, which it says, and I quote, "Receive, review, and investigate complaints." That's one of the responsibilities of this board. And if that section says receive, review, and investigate complaints, you would think that there would be an outcome. It's only common sense that once you've done these investigations, a review, the findings are submitted to those who complained about the situation. It's common sense. But if we need something in here to make sure they understand completely that the board has a certain amount of time to do it, then this is, like I said, one of several other bills that will be introduced to address the accountability of these boards. And I thank the speaker for continuing to move in this direction to ensure that our community has the same opportunities as those in the mainland or any other place where healthcare is a priority. So I thank the speaker again for the opportunity to stand in support of this measure and her work on it, as well as asking my colleagues to please support this measure. Thank you.
Senator Brown, you're recognized on the main motion. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of this bill, Bill 309, and certainly the efforts of our Speaker, Speaker Terlahi, and really staying on top of this issue with regards to the Guam Medical Board of Examiners. You know, it's unfortunate we've had incidences that have been reported and have had to be reported publicly because individuals in our community that have filed complaints did not feel they were properly notified or that their concerns or complaints that they made were even being heard or addressed in a timely fashion. And certainly this bill would require a timely notification with regards to their case on decisions that are to be made. There are certain areas, certainly in our lives, that we want to feel safe, or an expectation that we should feel safe and we should feel comfortable. You know, it's like a parent taking care of a child. When you're with your loved ones and your family, you feel a sense of warmth and you feel a sense of safety. When you go to your doctor, that's another time when you know, because literally with their expertise kind of, you know, of course, while your physical conditions may not something they might have direct control over other than to take care of you, you know, depending on what your situation is or what conditions you may have. But you have an expectation when you go see your doctor that your doctor is going to be professional, they're going to be responsible, and they're going to helpfully give you the best medical advice and medical care that they can to address whatever your circumstance may be. And that most people have that. I think all people have that expectation. You know, and I understand from the medical side, I'm not a doctor myself, obviously, but I can understand if you know, invested many years of your work and your effort into your education to become a medical doctor. Anyone does if you know, become an attorney, whatever the case may be, an engineer. You invest many years of your time and effort, money, to become a professional. You certainly don't want that to be marred, and you don't want your credibility to be taken down, because it can be taken down very quickly. And even now, in this days, definitely, of information, how quickly information moves, how social media moves information, you know, true, untrue, whatever the case may be, it moves quickly. It's kind of hard to correct if the information's wrong, but it gets out there. And I understand the concern there raised that, you know, gosh, someone's whole profession can be tarnished and they might lose the ability to perform their work because someone's made untruthful accusations against them. At the other end, from our perspective, our sense of where we have responsibility also is to our public, to our community. And when people make allegations, I mean, people might say, oh, it's an allegation. Yeah, it's an allegation until it's determined one way or the other. But if you don't know if your case is being heard, you don't know when it's being heard, how decisions are being made, if there's no transparency in that process, then how do you ever know that you as an individual who may feel victimized for whatever the case may be, how do you find resolution? And then more so, how do you address if you feel violated? Maybe it is the case of your medical condition, maybe you didn't feel was properly treated, or as the speaker had mentioned, the most recent cases that are also disturbing is allegations of sexual misconduct. And that's a word, gosh, how do you deal with that in a circumstance of which you are the most vulnerable when you physically are dealing with your physical being? It's different from your car. Goodness, your car, you can talk about it, look at it, and whatever, but when it has to deal with your physical being, your own physical body, especially allegations by women that, a certain doctor in particular in this community may be abusing his position for his own. Good Lord, who can even imagine what his purposes are if indeed these allegations are true? That's very, very disturbing. And we should not have comfort of circumstances like that happening in our community. And if they are, then by all means, they need to be properly reviewed. They need to be reviewed in a timely manner, and decisions need to be made. But when victims themselves, when individuals that feel victimized, there's many circumstances we can look at, obviously, if you feel you've been victimized. It's a very uncomfortable situation to be in. And more so if you're reporting it, and the officials that are supposed to be in a position to accept that report and process that report and then determine what to do and act on that report don't do so, then an individual feels even further victimized. What recourse do they have? A lot of people think, hey, if I'm not who's who and who's what in this community, who am I? My voice and my concerns just get rolled over because I'm a nobody. But boy, if it happened to somebody, then oh my goodness, the world moves for them. And we should not have that. We should not have that with regards to these boards that we've created. Even though the board says, we don't have the resources, and I've sat through many of those hours of those hearings when we had the whole, public hearings on medical malpractice. We don't have the personnel, we don't have the resources, we don't have this, we don't have that. But those things are coming to light, and I'm glad the speaker says they're starting to address that, but they're coming to light because complaints are coming out from members of the community. It's not the boards were not banging our doors down to say, hey, I need this and this and this in order to respond. And it's unfortunate that it has to come from a public side, because I would hope those, and the expectation, those that are in the medical community, those that sit on these boards, feel that sense of responsibility. Maybe today it's some other person being, having a claim put against. Maybe tomorrow it's you. And so I think we want to ensure that there's fairness in this process, that there's transparency in this process, there's accountability in this process. Because if somebody's misusing their official capacity with one person, the odds are probably fairly good, just looking at patterns, and people all have habits and patterns. Some are not so good habits, and they repeat them with someone else. Somebody else gets victimized. And that just shouldn't be acceptable to us. And it shouldn't be acceptable to the members of the medical community that practice, that we recognize and hold in high esteem. These cases that we've heard, it wasn't too long ago, a week or two ago in the news, a woman filed a claim against a doctor here, and I heard her voice in the news, and people go, well, is that a legitimate claim? Well, she's making it. It's very disturbing. Very disturbing. I'm sure for our male colleagues, what even more are the female colleagues that are here if we were in that circumstance, or knowing any woman, or anyone, any man, any, a child, God forbid, could be put in that circumstance. And then to not hear a response one way or the other, and know that your cases are being properly handled, and not knowing whether or not they're being properly reviewed. And that indeed, if someone has misused their authority, that's properly addressed. It's the old story, Madam Speaker, you always hear, that person came from so-and-so, and they were from somewhere else, and they came to Guam. Why did they come to Guam? Normally, if they have friends or family, everyone goes, okay, that makes sense. Sometimes you got to wonder. You wonder, is somebody coming in? We've seen it. It's happened. You don't think someone's out here because they're running away from some other jurisdiction that perhaps we heard that with a psychiatrist at mental health or behavioral health, right? We heard that complaint, and that's going through the legal process. But we just have to ensure accountability. As with us, we're very public officials, very visible. God forbid, accusations get made against us, whether it's true or not. It's going to be the front page of the paper in every form of media, news, social media, whatever the case may be. Colleagues, I'm sure some of you, all of you, us, who've been through that, who've been victimized by that, know what that feels like. And sometimes it's not pleasant, especially if it's not true. But, it comes with the territory. And the same for those that practice in the medical community here, those that sit on the board. I'm hoping that as a result of what has transpired, feel an even greater sense of responsibility with regards to undertaking their jurisdiction in properly, in a timely fashion, addressing these issues to the level of sensitivity they need to. Because it's hard to say you're a victim and be put in that situation to begin with to become public. That's hard. And to be further victimized by the system, my goodness, what do you say about that? I think we all agree that's not acceptable behavior. And we should expect more from our professionals. I expected more. But unfortunately, if this is what we got to do to put these guidelines and timelines in place so that the medical board is responsible to the public and the constituency of which they serve, then so be it. If they want to continue to practice and be responsible here in our community. So again, I wholeheartedly support Bill 309 and thank the Speaker Terlahi for to continue to stay vigilant on top of this issue. And apologize to all those victims out there that have been treated so badly and unfairly. We demand more. We should expect more. I don't think anyone else in our community would expect any less than that. So with that, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Anyone else on the main motion? Senator Paris?
I rise in support of Bill 309. I think it's very difficult for someone who's experienced any kind of traumatic malpractice, for that matter, to come before a board. I think it's the least that we can do to provide a report about the disposition or how it was handled. You know, it's hard enough going there to make a claim or complaint, but I think we need to do our due diligence in making sure our community is kept up to date in how our boards have handled the matter or the complaints. And it's also very important for our community to know, you know, if the complaint is investigated and found to be true. You know, it's very important for our community to know that, so that the misconduct is not repeated and it's prevented. So this is a really important bill, and I rise in support. Zuz Masi.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? If not, Speaker Terlahi, you may close.
Thank you. I just want to thank my colleagues who have risen in support of the bill and those who eventually vote in favor of this. I want to thank, you know, the HPLO for their continued work and cooperation. And this is a very difficult position that they are in. They are working for a board, and you know, we want the board to lead. And so I want to commend the board for the efforts that they have taken recently. And it's my hope that we just keep this, that this will continue, that they will continue to adjudicate cases promptly, but as described in this bill, that those who are making these complaints, that they are notified promptly of any decision by the board in those cases. And I want to thank them for coming out publicly and to helping us to get, you know, to promote these types of measures. Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
On the motion, Madam Speaker, to place on the voting file. Madam Speaker, on the motion to place on the third reading file, please.
I will again move to place Bill number 309-36 as amended by the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture to the third reading file.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. We're going to take a moment's recess. Just set both aside.
We're back from recess. Vice Speaker Munya Barnes, you are recognized.
Sijus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if I may, resolution number 343-36 COR is introduced by majority